What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. So last week, obviously, I talked about the conclusion of the NFL season with the Philadelphia Eagles absolutely dismantling the Kansas City Chiefs to nobody's real surprise. I mean, I'm the one who kind of predicted this. Kind of course. I thought the final score would have been 35-30, Philadelphia, something along those lines. I didn't expect a 20-point beatdown like Philadelphia gave Kansas City, but that's neither here nor there. And obviously, the NFL season's in the books. We are officially in the off season, and NFL free agency will be starting up soon, and the NFL draft is right around the corner with this week, the NFL Combine taking place. So we are going over my first NFL mock draft. So it's going to be a little bit of a shorter episode today because I'm going to kind of breeze through these picks a little bit. I'll stop to talk about certain teams and certain players that will have a very profound impact on their said franchise, and that's what I plan to do today. We're going to do my first mock draft heading up to the actual 2025 NFL draft in April. And as you all know, I'm a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32, get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. So without further ado, let's get started. So, the Tennessee Titans have the first overall pick. They have a decent amount of team needs. I mean, we got quarterback is an obvious problem. You got Mason Rudolph and Will Levis on the staff, and let's just be honest, that's not going to cut it for probably all 32 NFL franchises. So, for me, I think this is I've flip-flopped so many times back and forth between who should be number one. Now, I'm doing this mock draft without anybody trading places. This is if the NFL draft, the order that it stands right now, my mock draft is based off if no teams trade. And that is a very unlikely thing that anybody doesn't trade up or down in the first round just because it is not a quarterback centric kind of draft like we had last year with Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Drake May. There's just a lot of quarterback talent that was taken last year. So I'm doing this mock draft based off of everything that's current right now and without any trades. And this is how I believe it would go. So with the first overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft, the Tennessee Titans are going to take quarterback from Colorado, Shedeur Sanders. I've flip-flopped back and forth between Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, who I think are the two surefire favorites to go in the top 10 for quarterbacks, at least. That every other quarterback in this draft is I would say, not necessarily a significant downgrade, but there are many more issues to come with other quarterbacks as you get later down the line in that list. But flip-flopping back and forth. I mean, I know Cam Ward's the favorite quarterback to go first overall to the Titans, and he's my personal number one QB on the draft board, but something tells me that Shedeur Sanders is still going to be the first overall pick. Now, I could be wrong, but we will see come April. But I have the first overall pick going to the Titans and them taking quarterback Shedeur Sanders from Colorado. So now with the second overall pick, I have the Cleveland Browns taking quarterback Cam Ward. It is no secret that the Cleveland Browns have a quarterback issue. They have for a long time. Ever since they got rid of Baker Mayfield, it's been a carousel of quarterback. I am still one of the few people that believe that they never should have gotten rid of Baker Mayfield. But we're in a world where Deshaun Watson, with his troubled past and troubled offseason actions, got him $256 million fully guaranteed. And you just don't do that. And now that he ruptured his Achilles again, after rupturing it in season, Cleveland's in desperate need of a quarterback. And I think they do go with Cam Ward at this point if it fell in the draft like this. Now, it's possible that they would go Abdul Carter, who I personally believe is the best player in the draft. And no, I don't believe it's Travis Hunter. But When you look at the Cleveland Browns, I think with Cam Ward, you have Nick Chubb coming back from injury, which is an issue. You still have a decent offensive line, David Njoku, good wide receiver talent like Jerry Jeudy. I think that if you surrounded Cam Ward with the right amount of talent, I think he'll be able to deliver. And Cleveland is in desperate need of their franchise quarterback. So personally, I'm going with Cam Ward, even though he's number 1 on my draft board when it comes to quarterbacks. I believe Cleveland takes Cam Ward at number 2. All right, now, number 3, the New York Giants. I have them taking Travis Hunter. This is for the sole purpose. Now, I believe the Giants are in the running to get Matthew Stafford in a trade. I would not be shocked whatsoever if the Giants trade out of this. I mean, they need a quarterback desperately. But if you think about it, I think they would tank another year. Now, I don't necessarily believe the GM and head coach Brian Daboll would be there after another subpar season. But I believe that the New York Giants would have a better shot at getting Arch Manning next year in a more QB-heavy draft. So I have the New York Giants selecting Travis Hunter, pair him with Malik Neighbors, a decent offensive line, okay, maybe slightly below average, and an okay run game. I think they can possibly just load up on talent to surround a future franchise quarterback, whether that be Matthew Stafford. Obviously, if they get Matthew Stafford, they won't have this pick. But as it stands right now, I have the Giants taking Travis Hunter. Now, number 4 for the New England Patriots, I have another receiver getting taken, Tet McMillan, from wide receiver from Arizona. Now, I have this happening because they need Drake May to desperately succeed, and personally, Tet McMillan is probably the surefire favorite best wide receiver in this draft. And, you can debate between him and Travis Hunter, but I'm not sold that Travis Hunter is the best player in the draft, really. I think snaps aren't a stat. I don't think snaps should be a stat. Excuse me. Sorry. But at number 4, if there's one thing that you need in New England, it's wide receiver talent and skill position player talent. When you look at New England and Drake May, if he has any chance to succeed, they can't afford to not put him in a good position with weapons to actually throw the football to. And he showed upside even with the weapons that they had last year, which is basically next to nothing. So I think you just add to that depth and draft Tet McMillan from wide receiver from Arizona. So now we are on to the Jacksonville Jaguars at number 5. And at number 5, I have them taking... Where is he? There he is. Offensive tackle Will Campbell from LSU. Now, if they want Drake May to be their franchise guy, if they want him to still be there and healthy, he can't end up on his backside every other play. I know they need wide receiver help. I know they need weapons in general, but they have to protect their quarterback at all costs. I mean, Trevor Lawrence already has an injury history, and he's only been in the league, 4 or 5 years, and he already has a bad injury history. So I think that's a no-brainer. At that point, you have to take an offensive tackle to protect him. So I would have Will Campbell, offensive tackle from LSU, going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I don't necessarily believe that this will happen, but at 6, if it were to stand right now, I think the Raiders would get Abdul Carter at this point. I know they need weapons, but they do have Jacoby Myers. They have a stud in Brock Bowers. But with Max Crosby, I don't believe he'll be a Raider next year, possibly trading him away. And this is another scenario where I can see the Raiders trading up in the draft, getting rid of Max Crosby to get a quarterback because they're in desperate need too. But when you look at the talent perspective of just best available on the board at number 6, I think it's a no-brainer that you take Abdul Carter. I justified the other picks because of how desperately those teams need that certain aspect of their team, improved. So I can see Abdul Carter possibly, more than likely not going to happen, but mine's an out-of-pocket kind of draft because I have no trades in it. But at this point, I would see the Raiders taking Abdul Carter, more so like a Max Crosby, trade, if they were to trade up in the draft. All right, well, now we're moving on to the New York Jets, and they do need some help, especially on the offense is fine on weapons and everything like that. I do think that they could use a tight end, and I'm going with Tyler Warren, tight end out of Penn State. Even though he won the Mackey Award, even though I didn't think he really deserved it compared to Bowling Green's tight end. But when you look at the Jets, I know Aaron Rodgers is not there anymore. So whatever quarterback is going to step into that system, he's probably at an advantage, maybe not necessarily on the offensive line standpoint, which they do need to address, but I think having a presence at tight end would definitely help. They got Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson. You add Tyler Warren to a running back tandem of Breece Hall. I think that's a dangerous offense. Now, obviously, it matters about the offensive line situation, but we will get there when we get there. There's a whole lot of draft to go through, but we are just doing the first round with no trades at all. So personally, at this point, I think the Jets would take tight end Tyler Warren. Okay, now moving on to the Carolina Panthers, I think they get another best available player at this point. I would go with defensive tackle Mason Graham from Michigan. And I think that, after all the trades that happened last year, after all the things that happened with a lot of defenses just getting better, it seemed like Carolina just was stuck in place. Now, I know that was a big part about, Bryce Young getting benched earlier in the year, but then he came back and honestly didn't play terrible on the backstretch of this NFL season. But that defense is absolutely putrid. I know they need an edge rusher, but I think if you were to bolster up the interior defensive line and just make it impossible to run through, I think that will help out your defensive end. So I'm going to take Mason Graham at 8 overall to the Carolina Panthers. At number 9, we have the New Orleans Saints. They have issues everywhere, including quarterback, wide receiver, edge rusher needs addressed. That's just a tough situation in general. Now, I'm not one to believe that they don't have they have a kind of a depleted offensive, side of the football in some cases. So if I'm the New Orleans Saints at this situation, I think I go get a defensive player. I think I get Mykel Williams, edge rusher from Georgia. If there's one thing that the New Orleans Saints suck at, it's defense and offense. I mean, I have faith in Kellen Moore being able to install a good offense for New Orleans. I don't necessarily trust their defense whatsoever, but I think you need a presence on that defensive line, almost like what Mason Graham could be for Carolina in this mock draft. I have Mykel Williams, edge rusher from Georgia, being able to do the same thing for the New Orleans Saints. Now, when you look at the 10th overall pick for the Chicago Bears, their issue is offensive line and a little bit on the defense, but you can't tell me that it's a lack of talent on the offensive side of the football for the Chicago Bears. So I think they would take Kelvin Banks Jr., offensive tackle from Texas. If there's one thing we've all learned from the NFL over years past, that is you have to protect your franchise quarterback at all costs. It's the same reason I have the Jacksonville Jaguars taking an offensive tackle, Will Campbell. I will have Chicago taking the same thing. If they can protect Caleb Williams, protect their asset of the future, they'll be off and running. But the more that Caleb Williams has to run around and run for his life, you put yourself in a pretty deep ditch at that point. So I have Kelvin Banks Jr., offensive tackle from Texas, going to Chicago at number 10. And just to clarify for everyone again, this is a mock draft of round 1, my first mock draft without any trades whatsoever. Next week, I'll be doing a couple takes on, if it doesn't happen already, I'll be talking about possible trades that could happen in the NFL draft. Moving on to the San Francisco 49ers. Now, they have a lot of talent still on the roster, one of the most talented rosters in the NFL still, but they are old and they are brittle and they are very injury prone. So if I'm the San Francisco 49ers, I'm upgrading my offensive line. Trent Williams is getting up there in age. There was a lot of injuries on the offensive side. I think you get Armand Membu from Missouri. I think that'll help bolster up your offensive line, and all signs are pointing that they're still going to keep Brock Purdy around. Everybody knows my opinion on Brock Purdy. I don't necessarily think he's the greatest quarterback in the NFL, but he's serviceable. But if you're going to go that route of giving him all that money to a contract extension, you got to be able to protect him. So I would have the 49ers taking Armand Membu from Missouri, offensive tackle. All right, now we reach the Dallas Cowboys at number 12. And barring any issues that I can possibly foresee, I would have the Cowboys taking running back Ashton Genty. If there's one thing Dallas needs right now, it's more pieces on offense. It is CeeDee Lamb and nothing else. That's the reality of the Dallas Cowboys. If what Dak Prescott said, I talked about it last week, that video got a lot of views, with him calling out Philadelphia and basically saying that they're very close to competing with them. No, they're not, because they do not have an offense that is capable of keeping up with anything in that division other than the Giants, and that's not saying much about that dumpster fire. So when you look at this, what is one thing that they failed to do last offseason? Call Derrick Henry. Failed to get a run game. And I don't think Dowdle is that bad of a running back, but Ashton Genty is just another animal. You bring him into this offense, I think he will have an immediate impact and definitely take some pressure off of Dak Prescott. I think Genty can have a similar scenario to Zeke Elliott's rookie year. Not necessarily the same, because the offensive line is significantly worse than what it was ranked number 1 in the NFL back in 2016. But this is where I have the Dallas Cowboys getting. They need help on the offense badly, and Ashton Genty is the guy for them. Now we move on to the Miami Dolphins at pick 13. They need help in the secondary badly. Jalen Ramsey's getting up there in age. So at this position, I'm taking safety from Georgia, Malachi Starks. The back end of the Dolphins defense is putrid. At least all the games I watched them get torched and burnt. So I think it's wise for the Miami Dolphins to select a safety at this position. And realistically, any defensive back would be suitable, but I believe that this would be the best course of action for the Dolphins is to draft Malachi Starks. Now, let's move on to the 14th pick in the NFL draft. We have, we have the Indianapolis Colts. And for me, I think that they definitely need help in the secondary, and that's no shock, even though their offense has issues, but that's mainly an Anthony Richardson thing. I'll have them take Will Johnson, cornerback from Michigan, probably pound for pound the best cornerback in the draft. It's very arguable, but I can definitely see him making a decent impact on the Colts. The Colts back seven is just old. Some of them are old, some of them are brittle, some of them suck. So I think it's wise for the Colts to draft a cornerback in this situation. Now we're going to the Atlanta Falcons, who need help. They need DBs, edge rushers, safety. Here's the thing. I don't think that their offense is going to be an issue next year. I really don't. I don't think offense is going to be an issue at all. They have all the weapons they need. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Kyle Pitts at tight end, Bijan Robinson, a decent offensive line, and you got Michael Penix, your quarterback of the future. I think the Falcons are just a few pieces away from making noise in the NFC, and obviously it depends on how good Penix transitions to the NFL level. Obviously he didn't play much last year because Kirk Cousins was the starting quarterback. But I have the Atlanta Falcons. They desperately need an edge rusher. So James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee makes a lot of sense here. The Matthew Judon trade did not work out last year. I thought that was going to be everything that they needed to possibly make a playoff push, but it turned out it wasn't. So I have James Pierce Jr. going to the Atlanta Falcons at 15. 16, the Arizona Cardinals. This is an obvious one to me, and that's Luther Burden III, wide receiver from Missouri. If there's one thing that the Arizona Cardinals need right now is more wide receiver help for Kyler Murray. It's Marvin Harrison, James Conner, nothing else really on that offense. Their defense has needs, but I think you go with best available at this point, and that is definitely Luther Burden III. So that's who I have the Cardinals taking at 16. Now, when you transition to the Cincinnati Bengals, if there is one thing that they don't need really to address, that's offense. The Cincinnati Bengals are fine with offense. Now, do I think they're going to re-sign T. Higgins? I'm not necessarily so sure about that because, the Cincinnati Bengals are notoriously cheap with their players, so it wouldn't shock me whatsoever if they did not sign T. Higgins. So, but that defense is absolutely putrid in Cincinnati, and now they have Al Golden coming in to be the next defensive coordinator. I think personally that they do need help on the back end. So I will have them taking Siobhan Revel from East Carolina. They need help in the secondary. I flip-flop between him and Jalen Walker just now, but you can always find decent linebackers in other places. It's very hard to find good cornerbacks in the NFL. So that's where I have the Cincinnati Bengals taking at 17. Okay, the Seattle Seahawks. I think it's wise if they draft Tyler Booker, offensive guard from Alabama. They have good offensive pieces. I think the jury's still out on, Geno Smith and everything that he brings to the table. But if you bolster up that offensive line and give him more time, maybe he resorts back to what he was a couple years ago when he won Comeback Player of the Year. Now we move on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 19, and I would draft Jalen Walker, linebacker from Georgia. The offense was fine, in my opinion, with Baker Mayfield and all the weapons that he has. The issue, in my opinion, was really defense. They sometimes in situations couldn't stop a nosebleed, so I think they need to shore up that linebacking core. I'm okay with their secondary for the most part, but I think at this point, it's a must. It's a must for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think Jalen Walker makes the most sense. Now we move on to number 20, the Denver Broncos. I have them taking Matthew Golden, wide receiver from Texas. Now, Bo Nix, growth and development is very important. Sean Payton's already got him in a good place. I think they just add more and more talent to the roster when it comes to Denver. So I have Matthew Golden going at 20. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers. As many issues as they have, I think they are going to run it back with Justin Fields. I think at this position, you need another wide receiver. You need more talent. Even if you do keep George Pickens, which I figured they might trade him, I'm not sure. But if you have George Pickens, you need a number 2 wide receiver. You get Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. If Jeremiah Smith came out, he would have been the perennial number 1 overall pick. But Emeka Egbuka is still a phenomenal wide receiver. I think he'll fall a little bit in the first round based off of the other wide receivers that are in this draft. But I have the Steelers taking Emeka Egbuka. Now, when we go back to offense, at the 22nd pick, we have the Los Angeles Chargers. I think that it's wise if they took wide receiver Trey Harris from Ole Miss. If there's one thing that they can't continue to rely on, it's Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey and nothing else. Last year, they addressed the offensive line. Yes, they will need running back help because of J.K. Dobbins' injury history. But if you solely have to rely on Ladd McConkey, I think that that's a big time issue. So personally, if I'm the Chargers, I'm getting more wide receiver help, and I think they will in this draft. I'd go with Trey Harris, wide receiver from Ole Miss. The 23rd overall pick belongs to the Green Bay Packers, and I believe they'll take Derek Harmon, defensive tackle from Oregon. The defense needs help, and I think Harmon, he's a good player, pretty good player. I'd say that helps Green Bay bolster up that defense. I think the offense is fine. They might need a piece or two, but they're doing very well. I think Green Bay is still on the up and up. I think that at this point, you need to draft defense and best available, and I think Derek Harmon is that guy. Now we're getting into really the nitty-gritty when it comes to offense and defense. So when you look at the Minnesota Vikings, they need cornerback, they need safety help, offensive guard help. You know, there's a lot. There's a lot of help that they do need. But I think a DB would help them a lot in this situation. The offense I'm not necessarily worried about because they can either run it back with Darnold or they'll run it with J.J. McCarthy. That offense is going to be fine. I would draft Benjamin Morrison, cornerback from Notre Dame in this situation, just to bolster up that defense. That defense got torched against the Lions at the end of the year to clinch the first overall seed in the NFC playoffs. Now we get to the 25th overall pick with the Houston Texans. This one is obvious to me, and that's offensive line help. At this point in the draft, I would go with Josh Simmons, offensive tackle from Ohio State. You got to keep C.J. Stroud healthy. You got to keep him upright. I think this makes the most sense in this point in time in the draft. You have the weapons you need. You have an okay defense. The offensive line is okay, but I think you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong really when bolstering that offensive line to protect your star quarterback. So I think at this point, that's who the Houston Texans take. Josh Simmons, offensive tackle from Ohio State. I can see the LA Rams trading up to the 3rd overall pick in this draft. I really can. But I do think that they do need help on the defensive side of the football again. I think they would be willing to take a chance on Xavier Watts, safety from Notre Dame. I think shoring up that secondary, if you bring in Xavier Watts as a rookie and put Cameron Kitchens, who was a rookie last year and was an absolute stud for the Rams last year, I think that's going to be one of the most deadly. If Xavier Watts lives up to the potential that is, surrounds him, I think that the Rams has a possible chance to have the best secondary in football, at least the best safety tandem in football. You have Cameron Kitchens on one side, and then you add Xavier Watts. I think that would be a scary dynamic duo at the safety position in LA. So I have the Rams taking Xavier Watts. When you look at the Ravens now at the 27th pick, it's clearly obvious to me. Jahad Campbell, linebacker from Alabama. They need help in the linebacking core badly in Baltimore, and I think Jahad Campbell, arguably first or second best linebacker in this draft. Now we're moving over to the Detroit Lions at the 28th overall pick, and I think they go with an edge rusher, Nick Scorton from Texas A&M. Obviously, they will be in the sweepstakes runnings for Myles Garrett eventually. It's possible Myles Garrett will end up a Lion with Aiden Hutchinson. You can't blame Detroit's defense for not holding up against any teams, really. They had 17 players go on the PUP list last year. So I think that's the sole reason that the Lions didn't reach the Super Bowl is because of how many injuries they had. But I think you add another edge rusher to pair them with Aiden Hutchinson, I think you're off and running at that point. Sorry, guys. But now we move on to the 29th overall pick, the Washington Commanders. And again, it's just adding talent at this point. They do need wide receiver help. They do need defensive tackle help. So for me, I think they would go with like a guy like Cameron Williams, offensive tackle from Texas. The more you can protect Jaden Daniels, the better. You already got to the NFC Championship in his first year as a rookie. I think that in this draft, they focus on surrounding him with more talent and offensive line help to protect him. Now we move on to the Buffalo Bills. If there's one thing they need, it's help on the defensive side. I'm not worried about their offense whatsoever. As long as they got Josh Allen, they're going to be fine. They're going to be okay. At this point in the draft, I would take safety Shedeur Barron, safety from Texas. I think you need to shore up that secondary one way or another, most definitely for next year. So I think you go with probably the best available safety at this point in the draft, Shedeur Barron, at the 30th overall pick. Back to the Kansas City Chiefs with the 31st overall pick. Oh, where do we go from here? I would go with Wyatt Millam, offensive guard from West Virginia. If there's one thing that the Chiefs need help at, it is offensive line. I'm not worried about their skill position players. I know Travis Kelce's up in age, but you have Xavier Worthy, Rashid Rice eventually when he comes back after injury. Juju Smith-Schuster's still a vet, and though he'll possibly be cut. But either way, you still have Patrick Mahomes and Isaiah Pacheco. I'm not worried about Kansas City's offense. They'll figure it out. But if there's one thing that they do need to figure out, and quick, that's the offensive line situation. We all witnessed the Super Bowl. We all saw how badly the Kansas City offensive line got used and abused. So I think it's wise to take an offensive guard at this point. I know that there are skill position players out there worth taking, but if I'm Kansas City, I'm bolstering that offensive line. I'm protecting Mahomes. I'm getting back to the Super Bowl by revamping that offensive line. If they can't revamp the offensive line, I don't see Kansas City making another Super Bowl for another few years. So if they want to continue this window of dominance, they got to redo that offensive line. Now, when we go back to the 32nd overall pick, the very last pick in the first round, I have this. See, this one is tough because the Eagles are so loaded on the defensive side of the football and the offensive side of the football. They don't really need much. I think that at this point, I think they just add depth. So I think I can see them adding another edge rusher. I would have them taking Mike Green, edge rusher from Marshall. I saw his pro day status. I saw his pro day clips. That dude's an animal, and he would fit right in with the Philadelphia Eagles scheme and defense. And that is my mock draft. That's my first mock draft heading up to the NFL draft in April. And that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode, guys. I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. I'm your host, Dominic Lakeo. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up, it's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry.